Hi everyone, thanks for joining today's webinar, Let's Analyze Social Media Data with Tableau. This webinar is part of our customer webinar series, Talk Data to Me, which is aimed to provide tips, tricks, and how-tos to make you a smarter Tableau customer. My name is Megan Fay and I'm part of the marketing team here at Tableau. I will be your moderator. Just a few quick housekeeping items before we get started. All lines are muted. If you have a question, please use the Q&A window. Due to the length of today's webinar, we will not have a live Q&A at the end, but we'll follow up with each and every question that comes in via email after the webinar. A recording of this webinar and a copy of the slides will be emailed out after the webinar as well. And with that, I'd like to introduce our presenter today, Michelle Wallace. Michelle manages Tableau's social media presence, and we'll be showing you how we here at Tableau analyze our social media data with, you guessed it, Tableau. And we'll provide you some key tips to help you achieve your social media goals. Michelle, take it away.
Great, thank you, Megan. Hi, everyone. Thank you all for joining me today. I'm really excited to be here with you today to share how Tableau is using Tableau to analyze its own social media data. Before we dive in, let me tell you a little bit about myself and what I do at Tableau. As Product Marketing Coordinator, I oversee Tableau's organic social media presence. This means that I spend my days looking for great content to share on social media and engaging in one-on-one conversations on our social media channels. Note that I don't do any paid social content. At Tableau, organic and paid social content is separated in different teams. However, while the examples that I'll show today use organic data, many of the tips and tricks I'll share are applicable on the paid side as well. So what's on the agenda today? Well, first, we're going to talk about strategy. One of the key challenges in the social media world is simply the number of options available. It's not so much that it's difficult to get started with social media data, but rather it's difficult to focus while you're analyzing that data. There are many options for social media data sources, and within those data sources themselves, there are many options as well for metrics that you can analyze. So we'll start by talking about why a goals-first approach is important. Next, we'll dig into the mechanics. We'll talk about the options for where you can get social media data. We'll then talk about working with your data. We'll break down the metrics that are available and talk about how to focus on the metrics that are most relevant to you. And finally, we'll end with a demonstration of some of my favorite Tableau tips and tricks that are uniquely suited for the characteristics of social media data. So let's jump in. Before you start digging into your data, it's important to define your goals. What are the performance goals that you're trying to meet? By defining your goals, this will help you know which questions are most relevant for you to ask with your data. Now, I want to be clear that I'm not saying that you shouldn't take an iterative approach. It's important to be able to explore new questions as they arise, or even revise your goals themselves. But if you define your goals before you start analyzing your data, this will help you focus so that you know which new questions are relevant to ask or when it even makes sense to change your goals. Now, throughout this presentation, I'll be talking about how we apply our own strategies on our team. So next, I want to tell you about what our own goals are for background. This is a Twitter conversation that really epitomizes our goals. In a nutshell, Eric here tweeted on a Friday that he wanted to learn to use Tableau over the weekend. And very quickly, Paul and Emily, two very active members of our social media community, jumped onto the thread to offer their support and resources. Notice that Tableau played no role in this conversation. I like to use this conversation as an example because it shows the type of organic conversations that we aim to foster. Through every social media post that we publish and every one-on-one conversation that we engage in, our goals are to foster a community that's welcoming for new people to join. We want to help people get connected with people and resources that will help them become better Tableau users. and we want to share and highlight their own work. So when it comes to our organic social media presence, our goals are to foster community and expand our reach organically. We'll return to these goals throughout the presentation to illustrate how we apply our own strategies on our team. Once you've defined your goals, you can start to focus on the mechanics. Let's talk about the data sources that are available in the social media world. Now, as I mentioned, the social media world is full of options, and when it comes to data sources, that story is no different. However, all of the main options for social media data sources can be grouped into 4 basic categories. Now let's go over those categories. The first category is to export data directly from social media platforms. All brands that are on social media have access to free in-platform dashboards on the major social media channels. The data from these dashboards can be exported as a flat file, which you can then connect Tableau to. These are things like Facebook Insights and the data that's available on analytics.twitter.com, which all Twitter users can access. The next option is pretty similar, but it comes from a third-party platform. Many of you might be working with a third-party tool like Hootsuite, Simply Measured, or Crowd Booster. And many third-party platforms offer data export options, and these can be usually be downloaded as flat files, which you can then connect Tableau to. Now the third option starts to look at a different type of data. Maybe you want to work with a database instead of a flat file. Working with a platform like GNIP or DataSift allows you to stream live data directly into a database, which you can then connect Tableau directly to. And lastly, the fourth option is that you can actually code your own solution if you'd like. Networks have APIs, and Tableau has the web data connector, so you absolutely have the option to code your own solution. Now, as you can see, there are many different options for data sources. And while it's helpful to know all of these options, you don't have to use them all. You may choose to work with one of these options or a combination of these options, mixing and matching them in a way that makes sense for your own goals. So to illustrate, let's return to our own goals and talk about the mix of social media data sources that we use on our team. We use a variety of different types of data, but we actually rely pretty heavily on one type of data, the platform data. We use platform data like Facebook Insights and native Twitter data in almost all of the analysis that we do. The reason for this is that this data is very granular, and it helps us understand our own social media content to know if it's meeting our goals of engaging our community. We sometimes bring other types of data into our analysis as well, but we see this as adding context to the analysis that we've done about our own posts. In other words, we use our own post data as a baseline. Even when we're digging into broader data about our social media impact and our community as a whole, we always want to understand our own posts for context. So the platform data can often work as a great starting point, and you can bring in other data sources and blend them to add more context. Again, the way that you work with data sources and mix and match them will depend on your own goals. So once you have data, the next step is to decide what to analyze within that data set. Just like with data sources, there are tons of metrics available to analyze in the social media world. But again, just like with the data sources themselves, these metrics can be grouped into a couple of basic categories. Let's go over these categories. The first category of metrics is your basic benchmarks. Anything that helps you get a sense of the pulse on your social media presence falls into this category, things like followers or mentions. The second category includes any metric that helps you understand your audience. These are things like impressions, reach, demographics, and the location of your audience and when they're tuning in. The third category is all about understanding, once you've reached your audience, how they're engaging with you. These are things like your classic likes, comments, and shares. Now the fourth category is sort of a so what category. What's the actual business impact of what you're posting on social media? Conversions include any metric that helps you track that. Things like clicks or leads. And finally, the fifth category is also sort of a so what category, but it's a little bit different. I call this category opportunities. And I put any metric in here if it helps me understand the broader conversation that's happening around our brand. Tracking these metrics can help us find opportunities to reach more people. These are things like user-generated links, hashtags that are used when we're also mentioned in a tweet, and general brand monitoring. As you can see, there are lots of metrics that you can analyze. But again, you don't have to analyze them all. How do you decide which ones you'll actually focus on? Again, it depends on your goals. So let me illustrate by talking about the metrics that we focus on and how these relate to our own goals. So in our dashboards, we hit each of these 5 main categories in some way, but we only focus and dig into 3 main ones. These are audience, engagement, and opportunity metrics. Why these 3 specifically? Well, because our goals are mainly about community building and expanding our reach organically, we're most interested in understanding our audience and opportunities for reaching more people. So these metrics are the most relevant for our own goals. So we focus on these metrics, but we also talk to our paid team to see what they're focusing on and therefore get a sense of the bigger story around our whole social media presence. In this way, it's really helpful to know which metrics you'll prioritize in the time that you have available, and know if there are other sources of information that you can tap into to add context to your analysis. So at this point, we've talked a lot about strategies. But now let me show you how we're actually analyzing these metrics. I've pulled examples from our own dashboards that show each of these 3 metric categories. Let's dig into these examples. This first viz looks at audience. This is a common view that we use to understand our audience. Specifically, it helps us understand the impact of our posts depending on the time that they're posted. This view looks at Facebook data, and on the x-axis, you can see the hour of the day. On the y-axis, you see the number of likes that a post got if it was posted at that hour. Notice that there's a drop-down menu at the top of the view. This allows the viewer to change the engagement metric that's shown on the y-axis. For example, instead of likes, you could look at something like shares or the amount of reach that a post got. Notice also the impact of having a box and whisker plot. This allows us to see not only which hours have the most impact, but also get a sense of how reliable that data is. If we haven't actually posted a lot on that hour, it might not be as reliable. So this view is helpful in content planning, both in deciding when we're going to post for optimal impact, and also what hours we'd like to collect more data on. This next view looks at how our audience is engaging with us. It's a simple view, but it's essential for us to understand how our audience is engaging. We constantly look at bar charts of our most engaging content on Twitter and Facebook. And we often see consistent trends in the posts that make it to the top, week after week after week. Notice again that there's a drop-down menu at the top of this view that allows the viewer to change how the content is getting ranked. And lastly, this is an example of how we analyze opportunities. This view is more complicated, but it's extremely valuable in spotting opportunities for content to post on social media. Let me break down exactly what you're seeing on the view. On the top, there's a timeline that guides the viewer's interaction with this dashboard. The timeline shows 2 key pieces of information at once. The gray area chart shows the amount of traffic that we've gotten to our website from a social media source, not necessarily our own content, but just a social media source in general. And the colored bars on top of the gray area chart show what we've actually posted on our blog, Facebook, and Twitter on those days. So this timeline allows us to compare the cadence of what we're posting with the cadence of website traffic we're getting from social media sources, which can be a good indicator of organic conversations that are happening on social media. This helps us understand our place and our impact in the broader conversation that's happening around our brand on social media. And then below this timeline, we can see two important views that allow us to dig into what's actually happening. The left view shows a list of the content that we've actually posted on our blog, Facebook, and Twitter. And on the right is a tree map that shows the top content visited by social media sources. So the viewer can use the timeline to guide his or her analysis, filtering by a day or range of dates that they want to drill into. They can then compare what we've actually posted with the content that people visited on our website. Through looking at this view, we've found content that people were visiting even though we weren't posting about it at all. Clearly, people were sharing that content on social media. So this has allowed us to see trends in content that people are interested in talking about, regardless of whether or not we're talking about it. So now that you've seen some examples from our own dashboards, I'd like to spend the remaining time that we have showing some key Tableau tips and tricks in action. We're going to build a basic Facebook dashboard using Facebook Insights data. Let me go ahead and open up Tableau. I've downloaded my Facebook Insights data as 2 Excel files. I have page-level data that looks at the impact of our Facebook page, and I have post-level data that explores each of our individual posts. I'm going to start with the page-level data. The first thing that I want to point out is the data preview pane, which is what comes up when you first open up your data. Now, you might already be familiar with the data preview pane, but I specifically want to call this out because it's exceptionally helpful when it comes to social media data. One of the key challenges in social media data, besides simply the sheer number of options available in metrics and data sources, is that oftentimes data can be oddly formatted. The data preview pane was a new feature in Tableau 9.0, and it offers many options for cleaning your data before you bring it into Tableau. Let's break down what you're seeing on the view. On the bottom, you can see the fields that are in my data source. And this icon here indicates how Tableau is interpreting that field. Below that, you can preview the data itself. Right off the bat, you can probably see that the first line looks odd. This is because Facebook Insights data includes an extra line of data that simply describes each field in the data source. So essentially, we have a header that's 2 rows long, and Tableau has a hard time recognizing that first row. This is an area where the Tableau data interpreter, which is also part of the data preview pane, can really help out. The Tableau data interpreter lives here, and if Tableau senses a formatting issue like this one in your data source, it will prompt you to turn on the data interpreter. I'm going to go ahead and turn that on now. Now you can see that Tableau has reshaped my data. That problematic row has been taken out. And what's actually happened is that Tableau has rolled up that first row into the field name itself. So now my field titles include a description of the field itself. And that's helpful for what I want to do. Now there's one final thing that I want to do in my data preview pane before I start working with my data. I actually want to change the data type for one of my fields. If I select the icon that shows the data type, I have the option to change that data type right in the preview pane. With my date field, I'd actually like to change it to a date and time field. And I can do that easily before even bringing that data into Tableau, right in this preview pane. Now, the only reason we're doing this is because later we're going to blend this with a data source that has a date and time field. So having that level of detail on my date field here will help me blend that data more easily. So now let's go ahead and open up the first sheet and start working with this data. What I'd like to do is create a timeline of my Facebook followers. So I'm going to take my date field and drag it out onto the view. And now I have a lot of metrics here in my measures, so I'm going to go ahead and search for my lifetime total likes field. And I'll bring that out onto rows. And now this is sort of helpful, but really all it shows me is that my followers are growing. What I'd really like to do is add more context to this timeline. And I can do that by creating a dual axis timeline. Using dual axis timelines is one of my favorite Tableau tricks for making the most out of social media data. Because frequently, whenever I build a timeline, I find myself asking, what actually happened on that day? I want more context on the timeline, and creating a dual axis timeline is a great way to add some extra information without overwhelming my viewer. So to create this dual axis timeline, I'm actually going to start by duplicating my likes field. And then I'm going to change that duplicate field to be a table calculation of my percent difference. And now to bring that out onto the same timeline, all I have to do is drag this pill to the top view, all the way out on the right until I see this dotted line. And now I have a timeline of my followers and also what's happening beneath the surface, the percent change every day. This is helpful. This gives me more context when I'm digging into my data. Now this is one application of a dual axis timeline, but think of all the other ways you could use this with social media data. You could show the impact of your posts at certain times versus the amount of content that you've actually posted on those times. Or you could show fields from different data sources, like Google Analytics data compared to your Facebook Insights data. There are tons of possibilities. So this is why it's one of my favorite tips and tricks for working with social media data. I'm going to go ahead and do some basic formatting. And I'll go ahead and rename my sheet Facebook Followers. And now that we've created a timeline, next I want to analyze my individual posts. So I'm going to go ahead and connect to my post level data. In the data preview pane, I'm going to turn on the data interpreter again because I have that same problem with my first line of data. Then there's one other change I want to make before I bring my data into Tableau. In the data preview pane, you also have the option to rename fields in your data source. And I actually want to rename my date and time field. The reason for this is because in my post level data, it has a different name than it has in my page level data. I'd really like these to be consistent so that it's easier to blend that data. And I can rename that easily in the preview pane. So now I'm ready to bring this data into Tableau, and I'm going to create a bar chart of my posts. I'm going to take my post message field and drop it onto the canvas, and then I'll take an engagement metric, let's say engaged users, and bring it out onto columns. I'll quickly sort and do some formatting. And now I have a helpful bar chart that shows me my top posts in terms of engaged users that it's generated. However, as you can see, there are tons of other metrics that I could dig into here. And I think it would be really helpful if I could bring these other metrics somehow into the view as well. Well, this is a situation where a parameter would be really helpful. Parameters are one of my other favorite tricks for working with social media data because they allow you to pack a lot more information onto a view without overwhelming the viewer. To create a parameter, you right-click on the data pane and select Create Parameter. I'm going to call my parameter KPI. For data type, I'll select String, and for allowable values, I'll click List. And then I can type in the different options that I would like to give my viewers. And I could type in many more options in this one than just 3. But I'm going to go ahead and create the parameter now. And essentially what I've done is I've created a list of inputs for Tableau. But what I need to do next is I need to tell Tableau how to actually use those inputs. So to do that, I have to create a calculated field for my parameter. And I'm going to call this calculated field Select KPI. Now I've already written up this calculated field, and I want to mention that I have a templatized version for this at the end of my slides so that you can get a copy of it. But let's just break down exactly what this is doing. First of all, it's calling out the parameter itself, referencing it at the top. And then it breaks down each of the options that I've given in my parameter, the potential inputs, and told Tableau what to do when that input is selected. specifically what fields return. And again, you can have many more options than 3. I'm going to go ahead and create this calculated field now. And now all I need to do is take my new field, replace my old engagement metric, sort again, and then if I show my parameter control, I can change the field that's shown on the view. Now I've added a lot more information onto one view. Parameters are one of my favorite Tableau tricks for working with social media data because they allow you to put a lot of information onto a single view by using interactivity. And there are also lots of different options for how you could use parameters. For example, you can also use a parameter to change the time field that's shown on a timeline. There are tons of possibilities, and it's a really helpful tool to have up your sleeve when you have a data source with many different options. So next, I'm going to go ahead and rename my sheet, Facebook Posts. And the last thing I'd like to do is bring these two views onto a dashboard. I'm going to create my dashboard, take my timeline, bring it up onto the top, and then put my bar chart on the bottom. I'll do some simple cleanup. And now, of course, the last thing I'd like to do is link these two views together. Since I have a date field in both of my data sources, I can use the timeline as a filter. So I'll go ahead and do that now. Now, we've created a dashboard with a really nice flow to it, which packs a lot of information into it without being overwhelming at all or confusing in terms of how the viewer should interact. On top, we have a timeline that allows the viewer to see 2 important pieces of information and spot any important trends at a glance. Right away, my eyes are drawn to this day when we got a larger increase in followers than usual. So I can click on that day and I can see what we actually posted on that day. And through drilling into this, I actually found out that this was the first day, the Monday, of Tableau conference in Las Vegas. So that makes a lot of sense. And of course, I can also change the KPI that's shown on the bar chart. So there's a really nice flow to this dashboard, and it brings a lot of information into a simple, compact view. So I've created a templatized version of this dashboard, and I've published it to Tableau Public so that you can connect your own Facebook Insights data to it. To access this dashboard, all you need to do is go to the link provided here on the top. I've created a version for Twitter as well, which you can connect to your own data from analytics.twitter.com. So both of these can be connected to your native data, and you can automatically get your own insights and, of course, build on these dashboards themselves. Please note that these links are case sensitive. And lastly, I want you to be able to use the calculation that I showed in the demonstration. So here's a templatized version of the parameter calculation. Again, remember that you can have a line for every input in your parameter, and you can have many more inputs than 3. So thank you all again for joining me today. It was really fun to be able to share our own tips, tricks, and strategies that we've learned from working with social media data. Now, if you've sent any questions in the Q&A, I will follow up over email, and you're also welcome to reach out to me over email and, of course, on Twitter. Thank you again, everyone, for joining me today. I hope you have a great day.
Thanks, Michelle. And just a reminder, you don't have to remember her email address or any of those resources she has in this PowerPoint. We will be sending out a recording of this webinar as well as the PowerPoint deck after the webinar, probably in a couple days. I wanted to thank Michelle for presenting today and thank all of you for joining. Like Michelle said, if you did submit a question, we will follow up with you afterwards via email. We hope you can apply what you learned today in your day-to-day work. You can start analyzing your own social media data and look out for more Talk Data to Me webinars in 2016. Thank you again for joining, and we hope you have a great day.